So for those of you expecting Tim, you get me. Yay, hey, I got fans. I'll sign Bibles afterwards. No, kidding. So for those of you guys that don't know me, I'm Ethan. I'm an intern now here at City on a Hill. This is my first time preaching here, so don't expect much. And I do have one rule, one very, very small rule. I don't care what words I make up while I'm up here. I need you guys to promise me they're not going to end up on a t-shirt, okay? So today we're continuing our By Faith series with Barak. His story is found in Judges 4. And no, this is not Barack Obama. This isn't like, hey, political day at City on a Hill. This one's a little bit more interesting. So we're going to start in Hebrews 11 and then spend the bulk of our time in Judges 4. So real quick, by a show of hands, who has not heard the story of Barak? Nobody? Everybody's heard it before? Nobody's heard? Okay. So if you haven't heard it, this is going to be kind of a treat for you. It's a real interesting story is a kind of tame word to put for it, but let's dive in. So Hebrews 11, 32 through 34. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. So our guy Barak there gets a little, one line, this is Barak. So a little backstory real quick, though. In the book of Judges, we see kind of a pattern. There's always this, from the beginning of Judges to the end, there's this pattern of disobedience. The Israelites will disobey God, start serving other gods. So then God uses a foreign nation around them to kind of oppress them for a little bit. The Israelites then get tired of the oppression, they cry out to God, and God usually sends a judge or a deliverer. So that's where we see ourselves in Judges 4. Ehud had died. Ehud was the judge before our story today. Now also, if you guys get bored of me preaching or in between, anytime, read Judges 3. Judges 3 about Ehud is kind of an interesting story too. So if you guys, those of you who know that story, you know what I'm talking about. So, so Ehud had died, and God uses a guy named Jabin, who's the king of Canaan, to oppress the Israelites. Now Jabin's army was commanded by a guy named Sisera. And for 20 years, Sisera oppressed the Israelites with 900 chariots of iron. And this is where Barak comes in. Judges 4. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. Now, if you got a tree named after you, you're kind of an important person. So, guys, get your wives palm trees for Christmas. Maybe it'd be kind of romantic. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." We see that give him into your hand a lot through Judges, so in the back of your mind, that's not like marriage or like, you're going to oppress them. No, it's death. He's going to die. Sisera is going to be no more at the end and all of his army, so keep that in the back of your head. And Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." So first we see this lady named Deborah. She's a prophetess. She summons Barak and tells him basically fantastic news. God's going to deliver the army of Sisera into Barak's hands. And God even, gives him a specific plan on how to do it. God says, gather 10,000 men at this mountain. I'll draw out Sisera to meet you by this river, and I will give him into your hands. Barak is in addition to the explicit instructions, he's also passive in all that action. So God is doing all of it. It's not that Barak is, good enough, but God says that he will draw out Sisera, and the Lord's going to basically take him out. So all Barak has to do is walk in what God has told him to do. That kind of sounds easy, but we see that he responds with a very weak faith. He puts conditions on the promises that God gives him. He won't go out against Sisera unless Deborah goes with him. So our first point today, if you have your notes, Barak's response of weak faith reveals what's in our hearts as well. We often have a half-hearted, conditional following of God. We follow as long as we get something in return, or as long as our stipulations are met. Like if we say, God, I'll give you more of my time if you give me more time. If you'll cut out activities in my life, or we'll say, God, I'll start tithing, but first I want just a little bit more money so I'm comfortable when I do tithe. We put these little restrictions on God that limit the blessings that he wants to put in our lives. And we're forever putting conditions on what we'll do for God, which in turn prevents us from fully experiencing all he has for us. We miss out on blessings and from him and from the opportunity to be a bigger part of his story. So moving on in Judges 4, 9 through 10. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels. And Deborah went up with him. So Deborah agrees to go with Barak, but informs Barak that he's no longer going to get the glory for the victory. So God's still going to use Barak. Barak's still going to be part of the victory, but Barak's going to miss out on the blessings of being the kind of victorious one in that situation. We read that God's now going to sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. So point number 2 in your notes, God will still be made famous despite Barak's weakness. So we see that Barak responds with weak faith. Barak doesn't want to do things God's way. He wants to do things his own way. But we still see that God's still going to get his thing done. God's glory is still going to happen, whether we're a part of it or not. It's not, if I say, hey, I don't want to do this for you, God's like, okay, I'll get this person to do it. It'll still get done. And this person will get the blessings that I want to give him. So it's just kind of, God got lost there. But yeah, God's going to be made famous despite what we think we do or despite our weaknesses. So Deborah agrees to go with Barak, and there kind of becomes the judge of Israel, which is strange because women aren't really military leaders at all way back then. They're more of like the kind of stay home and take care of things at home while the men go out and serve in the army. She's actually the only woman listed in the book of Judges as a judge. So that's kind of cool too. But God raises up her as an unlikely candidate to help deliver Israel from oppression. We read that God is now going to sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And is Deborah that woman? I know, but let's find out. So now Heber the Kenite had separated from the Kenites the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent as far away as the oaks of Zananim, which is near Kadesh. Now, I'm not reading the wrong verses there. That's important to the story. Just kind of remember that. So when Sisera was told that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him, from Harosheth Haggayim to the river Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Haggayim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. So we see, God takes care of the army. Sisera is the only, Sisera is still alive. He kind of ran away. And this time when God tells Barak to go do something, he responds with a little bit more faith. He doesn't ask Deborah to go into battle with him. He responds to the promise that the Lord has gone out before him. And we read there that says, the Lord routed Sisera, the Lord takes care of everything. And that's in our lives as well. The Lord's gone out. Jesus has gone out before us, finished the race, fought the good fight. He's done everything for us. So all we have to do is walk in that. There's no trying harder. There's no doing better. There's just walking in what the Lord has for us. So also on the surface, it looks like with this battle, kind of 10,000 guys against 900 chariots, kind of seems like an unfair fight. Like, yeah, the Israelites are going to win. Even if in the chariots you had a couple people in it, that's 10,000 men against 1,800. But chariots back then weren't just some kind of transportation device you see in the movies where people can get to battle real quick. They're actually kind of vehicles of destruction. A lot of them had razors on the wheels so that if you're standing a little bit too close when the wheels got to you, you'd be kind of meat. And then if they were pulled by multiple horses, they actually had an iron bar across the front where, if you're standing in the front of that army, that kind of hurt taking that to the face. So really the Israelites were underdogs in this fight. That's why we see in verse 15 that the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army. It wasn't Barak. It wasn't good military strategy. It wasn't sheer force of men. It was the Lord. Period. God did all of it. The book of Judges is actually full of situations like this. Gideon is another story in Judges. We see that Gideon has an army of 30,000 men, probably more. And God's like, no, that's way too many. If you go fight the army with 30,000 men, you're going to take the credit for it. You're going to get the glory for it. So God basically tells Gideon to send men home to where he gets them down to about 300. And God's like, yeah, that's a good number. Go fight this army, and that way I get the glory. So we see that God uses, our third point today, God uses the underdog and the weak so that he would get the glory and we would have nothing to brag about. We've seen this all throughout our By Faith series. Men and women who are weak, foolish, and despised by others, yet they're mightily used by God to bring about his glory. 1 Corinthians, we see God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. God uses Barak's lack of faith and Deborah's deeper understanding of the promise of God to bring the army of Sisera to nothing. We see that Sisera is the only one who escapes, and now we're getting into kind of my favorite part of the story and kind of the interesting part of it. But Sisera, or since he's run away, I call him Sisera now, fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. We read about him earlier. He had pitched his tent, in this, as far, in this area near Kadesh. For there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not be afraid." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. Now, he's kind of tired from battle and he's a little bit sleepy, and she covers him with a blanket, gets him nice and comfortable. He asks for water. She gives him milk. Milk's a little bit more soothing. And he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if anyone comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." And here's the best part of the story. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg, took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. Yeah, kind of understatement there. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel, and the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. So the reason some of us don't really, know this story all that well is because when we're taught these heroes of faith, normally in traditional settings, we're taught that they're people to be like. They're people to emulate, to look up to, and be like Moses. He led the Israelites out of Egypt. Be that guy, or be like Abraham. He was the father. He was so faithful. He would have sacrificed his son. It's really hard to moralize this story. I don't think I'd ever get to preach again if I came up here and said, "Be like Barak. Just have enough faith, and God will, and in God, and things will go well for you." Or even better, be like Jael. Invite strange men into your home, lull them to sleep, then drive a stake through the side of their skull. So thank God that this story isn't about Barak or Deborah or Jael. It's our fourth point today. God's story is never about us. It's always about him and his glory. Thank God the story doesn't end there. Barak and Deborah are heroes for Israel, but Jesus is the greater hero. Jesus is the greater Barak and Deborah. Barak and Deborah deliver Israel from the rule of Jabin in their lives. Jesus delivers us from the rule of sin in ours. Barak and Deborah defeat Jabin, king of Canaan, and there's peace. It says there's peace in Israel for 40 years. Jesus defeated sin and death, and now we have peace with him forever. God uses Barak, someone weak in faith, to accomplish something for his glory. God uses us, sinners who are weak in faith and prone to wander, to bring his name glory. God raised up an unlikely deliverer in Deborah. Later, God would raise an unlikely deliverer for us, a lowly carpenter, a common man. Jesus came as a servant, yet became the greatest hero of all.